Hello, everybody. This is the SIG Upjet meeting. Today, we're going to go over the latest status on current development and investments we plan to make across Upjet, Uptest, and the Upjet-based providers. Last time we met, we talked about a key improvement we wanted to make around the use of converting singleton lists as embedded objects. And so I'm going to ask Alper to give us an update on that as the first item. Over to you, Alper.
Thanks, John. So we have a PR implementing this conversion in Upjet, which is linked in the agenda document. So what we do there is, provider maintainers can optionally opt in to convert the singleton lists in their generated MR APIs into embedded objects. So this is supposed to be a backwards compatible change, meaning that if a provider maintainer is not willing to convert, this API, then by default, they will not be converting, their APIs. But across the official providers, we would like to do this conversion because we treat it as an API quality improvement, where APIs that are not supposed to be lists appear as lists right now, and we would like them to be converted to embedded objects. So we opt in for this conversion across the official providers, but we will also be supplying the necessary CRD API version converters, which are invoked in chain by the conversion webhooks. So we have opened also two PRs consuming these Upjet changes, one in provider Azure AD, the other in provider GCP. Interested community members can take a look at these PRs also. And what they will see there is we are generating the converted APIs in new CRD versions, V1 Beta 2 versions, and we are keeping the V1 Beta 1 versions intact, meaning that the old clients should be functioning as before without any changes required on them. This means that if there are any compositions or other clients that use the singleton list-based V1 Beta 1 APIs, then they should be functioning as before, and no changes are required. So these changes are supposed to be fully backwards compatible. But for parties who want to use the new API, which is based on the embedded objects, can choose to use V1 Beta 2 versions of the generated MR APIs. So for provider GCP, we have also published into the Upbound registry, the versions of the resource providers, the family members that are based on the new API. We will be very happy to collect some feedback from the community, if they can give a try to the new API and, to the new experience we ship. We will be shipping soon. Yeah, thank you.
Tell me
Alper, go ahead.
Go for it, Matt.
Oh, I was wondering if this is maybe just a feature of Kubernetes that I'm not super familiar with, but if I have a composition, certainly if I have a composition that's creating a V1 Beta 1 resource, the expectation is that it would just create that resource, then it would be converted. What if I have a composition that is observing a V1 beta 1 resource, either directly or through provider Kubernetes?
Yeah, so you know, if you are observing a V1 beta 1, then you will still be observing, you know, the singleton lists. So you will not be observing embedded objects. You will still be seeing singleton lists. So nothing should
And so
be. Yeah.
the Kubernetes API just sort of handles that conversion in both directions seamlessly, and I can say, I want V1 beta 1, and it doesn't matter
correct.
how it's being persisted. Great.
Yeah, that's correct. So we have implemented as part of the Upjet PR, you know, 2 new API converters. One of them, so you can read the details in the Upjet PR's description. The first converter is what we call as the identity converter, is responsible for copying fields with identical names between the source and target versions. But the problem is, like, you know, these converted APIs, the field names are intact. So in V1 Beta 2, you will see an embedded object under the same name, and in V1 Beta 1 version, you will see with the same name a singleton object. So the identity converter will not be able to copy them. So we introduced another converter for this purpose, which is the singleton list converter. And, you know, because we register these converters, and, you know, we register them for the conversions from V1 Beta 1 to V1 Beta 2, and also for conversions from V1 Beta 2 to V1 Beta 1. And, you know, these converters are responsible for the actual conversion. So why I'm explaining this, the API server cannot handle this automatically, but it gives us a hook point. You know, these are the, you know, conversion webhooks. And, you know, we have established a mechanism where we can chain an arbitrary number of conversion functions to be invoked by the conversion webhook. And, you know, these 3 converter functions, as you see here, are actually responsible for doing the seamless conversion back and forth between V1 Beta 1 and V1 Beta 2. Does it answer your question, Matt?
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you. So further details we can discuss in the Upjet PR if you have any further questions.
Was that,
Alper,
did Jonathan, did you have something else?
Oh, sorry. If there are any other providers who want to make use of this functionality, is reading the PR description sufficient for them to know what to do there? I know, you know, one of the complaints right now is people want to use Upjet, but the documentation is a bit sparse at the moment.
Yeah, so I'll not consider it as sufficient. So we definitely need to provide much more documentation than this. I put some code examples, and, you know, looking at, you know, the code examples in the PR description essentially, you know, tell you what to do if you want to do this. But there are also certain modifications and adjustments that you need to make. For example, if this is the first time you are adopting multi-version CRDs, then, you know, one of the common things that we do is we have a deprecated API for configuring cross-resource references in Upjet, which is based on giving the actual version and package of the Crossplane resource, you know, which you are referencing to. So a long time ago, we have replaced this, you know, with a higher level, you know, configuration API, reference configuration API, which asks you the Terraform resource name instead of the Crossplane resource name. So we have recently deprecated the old API. And, you know, if your provider is not making use of the new API and using the deprecated API, then, you know, when you try to generate multiple versions of these CRDs, you will, with a high probability, run into issues when doing so. So this is just one example. You know, it's kind of more involved than what's described in the PR description. And, you know, we need to document these things with a good and nice, like, you know, Upjet documentation, you know, telling you what to do in order to be able to generate multi-version CRDs and in order to make use of these changes. By the way, I've explained this in the Upjet PR description. You are not forced to generate new versions. So a provider maintainer can just, you know, replace, you know, the old APIs, let's say V1 Beta 1 APIs with the embedded objects. So you don't need V1 Beta 2 APIs in order to do this. So if you have control on the clients of this API, like, you know, if you know all the compositions and, you know, scripts, etc., whatever, using the V1 Beta 1 APIs. And if you are not willing to introduce a V1 Beta 2, but instead adopt the existing clients, then this PR has enough flexibility to allow such use cases. So you're not enforced to generate multi-version CRDs and things like that. But for the official providers, we will be following, you know, the multi-version approach. And, you know, from a documentation perspective, we are lacking proper documentation, unfortunately.
The good thing is there's a change to the docs, Crossplane docs that was merged recently. And I spoke to Jarrett and Pete, who's been maintaining docs. And we're going forward, we're going to add Upjet guides on the actual Crossplane documentation site. So that will become the central hub for us to publish, you know, end user facing kind of like documentation. I imagine there will still be a level of documentation for Upjet developers that will pretty much be in the repo, but for users of Upjet, you know, who are more kind of like provider authors, will put guides in the Crossplane documentation for them there.
Is this something that's going to opt in for any, like, so when I was working on the provider AWS Terraform provider version upgrade, I noticed that one of the changes was a change to the number of max items, and I think it was changing from 1 to 3 for something.
Yeah.
Is that the sort of change that would break this? Is
Yes,
that what we're?
definitely. Yes, definitely.
So is there an ability to opt in? Is the opt-in process for this a like per resource kind level, or is there a way to say, like, is there a way for provider authors to differentiate between this is a Terraform block that has max items 1 and there's no reasonable prospect in the future that this might ever change, or there is, maybe this will change and I want to keep this one as a singleton list?
Yeah, so there's also a short discussion in the Upjet PR description regarding this topic. So what we do with these changes here, you opt in for converting all the singleton lists to embedded objects at the provider level. But for certain fields, you can opt out. So if you opt in, then all embedded lists will be generated, singleton lists will be generated as embedded objects, but via resource configuration. So, you know, we have under config package, you can provide per resource configuration overrides. And this is an overridable configuration. So for a specific resources, specific field, which has been by default converted from a singleton list to embedded object, you can remove that configuration and, you know, it will still be generated as a list. So if Terraform maintainers, you know, the Terraform provider maintainers, you know, decide to, you know, relax the constraint, the max item constraint in a future version, then it's still an API change. So, you know, relaxing that constraint and, you know, Currently, we are not generating these CRD validation rules, as you know, but imagine we were generating them and we were enforcing a max items of 1. And, you know, if the underlying telephone provider relaxes this constraint, we should be also updating, you know, reflecting it in our APIs, right? So we have a similar situation here, and in such cases, we will no longer be generating, you know, the corresponding field as an embedded object, because, you know, when we traverse the Terraform schema, we are just looking at fields or lists with the max items equals 1 constraint. And, you know, if the underlying Terraform provider relaxes this constraint, we will no longer be generating it as an embedded object, but as a regular list. And this will become a breaking change in our API, but this always has been a breaking change for our APIs.
So then would that
Yeah.
would that mean we would need to, when encountering that, add some code to introduce a v1 beta 3 that looks
Yep.
similar to v1 beta 1, although maybe not exactly the same?
Yeah. In that case, the proper way for us to do would be to introduce a new version, because if we just override v1 beta 2, which has this embedded object with a list, then it will be a breaking change. And, you know, in order to avoid this, we will preferably generate the new API as v1 beta 3 and provide the necessary API conversion functions.
Does that mean we now need like 6 conversion functions to go from any of the 3 to any of the other?
So, you know, the API server prevents that. So always the conversions are done on a star topology. So there is this hub and spoke, you know, topology. So it's not like you convert from v1 beta 1 to v1 beta 2. So we designate a hub version, and then all conversions are from that hub version or to that hub version.
Great.
But for different version pairs, we may need different converters. If that's the question you're asking, that's correct. So this is quite a complicated task, as you're pointing. And at some point, we should also have, you know, a policy to deprecate older versions and, you know, phase them out. Like, you know, at some point we will just want to remove v1 beta 1 versions which contain just a singleton list, for example. So we are newly adopting these policies and strategies and things like this, and we have a lot to do here.
Alper, speaking of the complexity and a lot to do here, what is the kind of like forecast for rolling this out? You know, the PRs obviously still need to be reviewed and so on, you know, but what is the plan here?
Yeah, so the plan is to roll these chains out for provider Azure as the next step. And, you know, we will, of course, cover provider AWS, but it will be a little bit more difficult because in provider AWS, we already have v1 beta 2 versions. And most importantly, you know, there's a runtime component to these changes. So in addition to the code generation pipeline changes, like, you know, we are generating now CRD APIs with embedded objects instead of singleton lists. But, you know, this requires changes in the code generation pipelines, but there's also a runtime component to this. So at runtime, when we read the embedded object and we represent this as an embedded object in our structs right now, just before passing this down to the Terraform stack, we need to convert them back to singleton lists. And when we read from the Terraform stack, like, you know, when we read Terraform state, we need to convert those singleton lists back to embedded objects at runtime. And, you know, we have implemented this just for the Terraform plugin SDK client. For AWS, we will also need to implement, you know, this for the plugin framework resources. That component is missing. the underlying functions, etc., to be called are already there, but we need to enhance the Terraform plugin framework external client to call them. That's currently not part of this PR. And we will, we can do it as a follow-up PR in Upjet, and then we can roll out the changes to provider AWS. So currently, Fatih has completed the validation for provider Azure AD. And we are doing more tests for provider GCP, and we are also asking the community to help us in the validation, because this is really an involved change with a large surface. Lots of resources are affected, etc., and lots of is going underneath these changes, as you would imagine. And once we are confident with the provider GCP change, we can merge it, and in parallel, we will be continuing with provider Azure. And for provider AWS, we will need some further changes on the Upjet side, as I described.
All right. Sounds like there's at least a couple of weeks worth of work and testing and validating still left on this, but rather doing it properly than rushing something out and causing some challenges. All right. Maybe I can ask you, Alper, to also just give a quick status update on the introduction of MR metrics in the providers and in Upjet.
Okay, so SG has worked on a cross-plane runtime pull request, which introduces certain managed resource metrics. Maybe we can also link it to this document. And we have recently merged that pull request, and we are introducing these new MR level metrics you see. The cross-plane managed resource first time to readiness seconds metric has a counter all part already in Upjet. But the exists ready synced metrics, etc. Most of them were not present previously, and most importantly, the cross-plane runtime PR introduces these metrics for all the providers in the ecosystem, which opt in to use and publish these metrics. And GEM has opened a series of PRs in Upjet and across the official provider repositories, to consume these changes and, publish the new metrics. So we are planning official provider releases tomorrow. If everything goes well, we would like to, ship these metrics with the new versions of the official providers. And hopefully this will help, from an observability and monitoring point of view, for the operators of our official providers.
All right, thanks. We can get back to the providers a little bit later. Sergen, would you maybe give us an update on the work that you've been doing on Uptest so far?
Yes, thank you, Can. So I am working on the migration of the underlying testing framework of the Uptest from Cattle to Chainsaw. So this migration is in progress. The Chainsaw is a very comprehensive tool, and this tool has different behaviors and usages from Cattle. They have some similar parts, but also they have some similar syntax and some different use cases. And there is not a short learning curve in the context of the Chainsaw, and there are many different ways to implement the same thing. And we are trying to decide the best and the most compatible thing. Also, they will be also compatible with our future improvements in Uptest, because we are also planning doing some another improvements in Uptest. So we are trying to decide the best choice during this implementation side. So the thing is that we started refactoring the template files As you know, we are generating our test files in the Uptest, so we have some templates files, and we are using Go templating in there. And we need some refactoring on there. We are changing our templates from the Cattle to Chainsaw. And also we need to change our actually Uptest generation code. We need to add some new parts, and for example, some fields to our generation structs, because as I mentioned, that they have some different usages within each other. But from now, I can say that we will have a more clear and more declarative testing files. For now, we are mainly using the capability of Cattle about running scripts and commands, and we are managing the life cycle by using this capability. But now it seems that Chainsaw has more actually capabilities on that, and we will have more declarative test files. It will help to us actually also maintaining these templates, and also for users and community members. It will be more readable and more understandable, we hope, that at this point. And I also chat with a maintainer of the Chainsaw. He is also very kind, and he also offered actually usual things on this migration. They are also very happy to see that we are migrating our tooling to their ecosystem. Also, I joined their Slack channel, and I observed that they shared my proposal in the our repo about changing our tooling. So I think the best thing is that they are ready to discuss our next requirements in the Chainsaw. And he's very also excited on developing their tooling. So I think this is a nice point, because, you know, of course, every tool has some actually negative parts, or the need to develop parts. And at this point, we have very excited actually friends at that. And they also, as I mentioned, they also offered the usual thing for helping to us for this migration. I am in the actually touch with him, and this is also actually a maybe bootstrap point for this migration part. So yes, this is the case.
Maybe, Sergen, we can also discuss a little bit about, you know, the improvements we are doing to better support multi-version CRDs and, you know, in Uptest.
Yes, thank you, Alper. I can also quickly mention on them. So after actually this multi-version CRD support, we also had to update our import step. Before we directly scale down our pods for the provided pods for clearing the state before the import. And we have a patch actually step for clearing the status conditions to ensure that the actually resource is again populated as ready for observing this readiness again after scaling down and clearing the status for the resources, then scaling up again, and this test is continued. So at this point, this caused an issue because now we have some conversion functions, conversion webhooks, and we need this conversion webhooks by patching. But for running this conversion webhooks, we need to also have some living pods in there. So we had to change the import steps a bit, but at this point we have a new issue. It is related to synchronous thing. We had to check the pods are really ready, and also the endpoints are in the ready state. Now I am still working on having a better sync point by using the actually endpoints objects. I am thinking that I found a way on this, and I am planning to open a PR today. This will actually rely on the endpoints objects subsets field of its resource, because when we scale down the pods, the subsets field is being empty and null, and we again scale down and the endpoints start to serve to the outside. At this point, the subset is filling again. So this is the observation, and I tested it locally, and I am working on this. But the plan is, in my mind, opening a PR on a new sync point by using this endpoints fields.
Yeah, I think, this is also related to some previous discussions that Matt initiated regarding conversion webhooks. That's why I explicitly
Yes.
Yeah, when I first started using the provider AWS with conversion webhooks, I was still on an old Crossplane version, and they all crashed. And then I couldn't edit any of my managed resources in my cluster. And like this was like a TLS configuration problem or something like that. But that has definitely planted the seed in my mind that it would be better if there was a way for the conversion webhooks and the reconciliation processes to be more independent.
Yeah, Matt, I agree with you. So maybe we can initiate, a similar discussion in, upstream Crossplane, because the deployment is controlled by the core Crossplane, as the package manager. So recently, it has been abstracted so that different, deployers, let's say, package deployers can be implemented, etc. But we should also check, the general situation, in the Crossplane ecosystem, the core Crossplane itself, etc. So if I'm not mistaken, they're also deploying, the conversion webhooks as part of the provider processes, etc. And, maybe we can, I feel like, this better suits an upstream discussion instead of specific providers.
That makes a lot of sense. I am really happy to hear that Sergen is working on switching to Chainsaw. Everything that you said about the maintainers of Chainsaw and all of those nice things are things that I had like sort of gotten warm fuzzy feelings in that direction of before, so I'm not surprised by any of that. And I think I even have a like half working local branch where I was like, well, what if I just tried to naively switch Uptest to using Chainsaw? Like, what happens? And the answer is it doesn't work because Uptest is a lot more complicated than your average Cuddle framework. So I totally agree that this is going to be better. One of the things that I would really like to introduce for an Uptest improvement is using more update tests. At least in provider AWS right now, every test has a create, update, import, and delete steps. And I think of the like 930 resources, there's like 3 update steps. So almost nothing uses the update step, and I would like part of that is because it's very cumbersome and clunky because of the way that it's based on scripts, and like you have to put everything in annotations, and like there's just got to be a better way to do this. So I at least get the impression that Chainsaw will help with that.
Yes. Also, one thing is about you mentioned, Matt, the one improvement we want to do in Uptest is more comprehensive checks in the MRs. Like, for example, in the spec field is matching in the states field as a value part, not only checking the status conditions, and we want to also making more comprehensive checks, and also this is also related to update part of this. And there is a declarative way on the Chainsaw, as you mentioned, not only relying on the annotations or by using some scripts and comments. I also aim to use this declarative and more easier parts.
Awesome.
right. Moving off of Uptest onto the Upjet-based provider. So, as Alper mentioned earlier, we're planning new releases for the four providers: AWS, GCP, Azure, and Azure AD with the new metrics.
You went on mute.
Sorry. Are there any other key updates on any of these providers anybody wants to raise, or concerns, or any discussion points?
I'm also working on upgrading the Terraform provider version for provider AWS. And my instinct is that that would be better to not release at the same time as, like, I think my preference would be for that to be a release that doesn't happen tomorrow, that happens later than tomorrow and earlier than next month. Just from a, like, if we're introducing from a having more smaller releases is better point of view in terms of changing one thing at a time. I also saw a couple of pull requests in the Terraform provider that they are scheduling to release this Thursday that I kind of want. So I may upgrade to version. Right now my PR is for 546. I may upgrade it to 547 before releasing it. Sounds like the singleton list is, I think, given timelines, I think my preference of sequencing would be first MR metrics, then Terraform provider, then singleton lists. Does that sound like a good order to you, Alper?
Yeah, I agree. So you say first we bump the version and then we convert the APIs. Did I understand it correctly?
Right, so that the singleton list conversion release doesn't also change the Terraform provider version.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, so I think that's the best way to go. Just from a change one thing at a time, and perspective.
Yeah, so when we bump the underlying Terraform provider version, there will be updates to the underlying schema, which could also have implications, on the available singleton lists and things like that. So
yep,
it could affect the PR, that converts to the embedded objects, but
I've already got a decent amount of progress on a draft pull request in provider AWS for upgrading to Terraform provider 5.46. One of the other things I did was I wrote a script that parses the Terraform provider's changelog and, like, between these versions, find everything and sort them by resource kind so that I don't have to look at each release one at a time and filter out all of the resources that we haven't implemented. I would love to get provider AWS to the point where we can be releasing a Crossplane provider for every Terraform provider. And that's going to require a lot of automation, both on code gen and testing. And I think it's all doable. I don't see any, like, this part is going to be nearly impossible, like, blockers there, but I feel like that would be a really great North Star. They seem to release every Thursday.
Do we know what the release cadence is for the Terraform providers? Do they have, like, a predictable cadence, or is it
Terraform provider
needed?
AWS releases every Thursday, and then they have patch releases as needed. They do minor releases every Thursday.
All right. Yeah, we previously tried to stay up to date with the Terraform providers once a month, but we just got swamped with other topics of priority that it just never. It's always the last thing that you care about is, like, if everything else works, just don't change the Terraform provider. But I agree, it would be great if we if we had the tooling and the process to give us the confidence that this is fine, to do that's the ideal North Star. I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I don't want to try and like introduce a whole bunch of toil just so that we can have more frequent releases. I feel like we should first automate it and make it a good process, and then we can run it quickly.
So, Matt, we already have a job, which bumps the underlying Terraform provider version, and it used to be enough, to prepare the change that bumps the underlying provider version. But with the recent runtime architecture change that we did, it's no longer valid because, we are linking to the underlying Terraform provider code, and we need to adopt that job. So if you would be interested in updating that job, I can also share the details with you. And, the idea is we have some previous tooling which used to work, but, we need to adopt it. And of course, we can also discuss other alternatives, other tooling implementations and things like that. I'm not, saying we should do it this way or that way. But, just to inform you, we had some previous tooling that we were planning to adopt. Right now, we are doing certain tasks manually. And, we had some automation around those things. And, generally, there is the validation component for the APIs that have changed and things like that.
I think that one part that I feel like I would be good at is an automated mechanism for keeping the Terraform provider AWS fork up to date. I'm working for work on a project that involves 2 Git manifests, one which has a bunch of YTT templates, and then one which has two Git repositories, one with the templates, and then one with the output of rendering all of those templates. And then this is how we're managing all of our Kubernetes manifests and keeping them in sync with robot commits. And so that seems similar-ish to the workflow that would be needed for keeping the provider AWS fork up to date. It would be really helpful if we could get that one new resource that was added manually actually contributed upstream, because that makes up for a lot of Git conflicts. So that's one thing that would help with that. I think
So
it's a support case.
you are mentioning, one resource that we added in our fork, which is not available upstream, right?
Right.
Yeah. So.
And there's not even a pull request for it upstream.
Yeah.
I think Jem said that that was the plan, and then priorities shifted.
Yeah. So we also discussed it recently, and our plan is to open that upstream PR, and we will probably remove it from our fork till that PR is merged.
Okay, cool. So the other obstacle to me helping with this is that the Upbound Terraform provider fork is in the Upbound org, and I don't have any access to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to give you access there.
Okay,
there's nothing special there. It's the only reason it's staying there for now is until we get those license exceptions sorted with the CNCF. I heard back from them, and we're going to. There's an existing issue for their legal department, and I'm just gonna add some more repos to the list there and to get exceptions for. But I don't expect this to be a quick thing. So it'll stay there for now. But I'm happy, as a maintainer of provider AWS, I'm happy to add you to the fork as well.
Most lawyers are not especially quick, and those who work via GitHub bug reports are not an exception to that.
All right. Any last minute topics? We're at time. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and I think if there's anything else, we can asynchronously chat on Slack with each other as needed. All right. Well,
Cool.
enjoy the rest of your day, folks. Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.